Well, good morning, everyone. So perhaps ironically, or not, maybe providentially, we're talking about fruits of the Spirit of technology today. Does technology foster the fruits of the Spirit? As I'm being frustrated with speakers, the speakers work for my audio, but not for the video. So we're using old speakers for the video, and didn't get the projector working with the originally. So we had a Plan B projector, but I asked myself in this, okay, need to be patient, right? So you can say, well, sometimes technology is a test, but we're talking about digital technology, and does it foster the fruit of the Spirit, right? Love, patience, kindness, joy, gentleness, faithfulness, goodness, peace, self-control. So we'll look at some studies today to ask this question: what does our emergent digital technology do to our spiritual lives? So much of our lives is lived in the context of digital technology. Digital technology is everywhere. It's every time we turn around, there's something digital. We're always on our phones. We're always on our computers. We're always involved in digital entertainment. What does this do to us? Does this help our spiritual lives, or does it hinder them? Most of our sin lives are lived in the context of the digital world. So this is, it's surprising that we don't hear many sermons. I don't know if I've heard any sermons ever preached talking about technology, digital technology in our sin life. So we're going to talk about that a bit today. Does our immersion in digital technology facilitate freedom? Does digital entertainment, social media activity help us or hinder us from obeying the command to love our neighbor? This is what we're going to talk about today, and ask, what can we do? How can we return to maybe even to square one with some of these things and move forward with wisdom? So we'll start with Scripture. Often Bibles entitle this section in Galatians 5, Freedom in the Spirit, Life in the Spirit. And I'll just read from it, Galatians 5:13 through 15. You, my brothers and sisters, were called to be free. That's a wonderful verse. Called to be free. We love freedom, right? Freedom's good. But do not use your freedom to indulge in fleshly desires. Rather, serve one another humbly in love. For the entire law is fulfilled in keeping this one command: love your neighbor as yourself. If you backbite and attack each other, watch out, or you will be destroyed by each other. So the idea here of devouring each other, right? The words that Paul uses are animal words. If you attack each other, and bite each other, right? If you're always at each other, be careful, you'll consume each other. Do not use your freedom to indulge in fleshly desires. Rather, serve one another humbly in love. It continues. So I say, walk by the Spirit, and you will not gratify the desires of the flesh. For the flesh desires what is contrary to the Spirit, and the Spirit what is contrary to the flesh. They are in conflict with each other, so that you are not to do whatever you want. And so this idea of, we're given freedom, but there's a war in between different parts of us, right? There's a war, there's a conflict, right? Our flesh desires one thing, our spirit desires something else. This doesn't mean that these are necessarily unrelated parts of us, but it means that there's a conflict in our core that we want to do things and we can't do them, right? Maybe, if we want to do something our flesh desires, our spirit says no, we shouldn't always do what we want, right? And that's not the point of our freedom. The point of our freedom is to serve one another humbly in love. So it continues with the works of the flesh. Now the works of the flesh are obvious. This is talking about what does the flesh desire. And so it goes into what does the flesh desire, which are sexual immorality. That's the word porneia. It's a complicated word in the ancient world that is much broader. Some translations will say things like fornication, or sexual immorality is probably the most broad term to encompass that. In the ancient world, it was used for coarse joking. It was used for certain types of illicit sex, different types of activity. It was used for dishonoring sexual humor. Impurity, that's related to sexuality too. Sensuality, that's related to sexuality too. Huge focus on sexuality. Idolatry, Pharmakeia, that's where we get pharmacy from. This is a much used word in the ancient world. Plato talks about this. Aristotle talks about this. The philosophers that Paul talk about this. Circe, if you know the ancient Greek sorceress Circe, she's a seducer. She uses her beauty to seduce. The idea behind pharmakeia is using beauty to seduce. In the ancient world, it was used of cosmetics or altering one's physical body to seduce someone else, and in an unnatural way. So this is the core of this. I don't know how a good way to translate this. In the ancient world, they'd often talk about certain types of unnatural cosmetics or unnatural perfumes, but also love potions, right? So it's often translated magic because of the love potion part. It's where we get pharmacy from, not medicine, but if it was medicine to unnaturally make you attractive. So this is an interesting word, pharmakeia. Hatred, strife, jealousy, outbursts of anger, disputes, dissensions, factions. That's the Greek word heresies. And envy, drunkenness, sexually immodest partying, sometimes translated orgies, and the like. I warn you, as I did before, that those who practice such things will not inherit the kingdom of God. So this is what Paul sees as the opposite of love, right? If you think about the context, if you're angry with someone, well, that's not so loving. If you lose control in drunkenness, if you're envious, right? If you're trying to seduce someone, you can ask, is seducing someone really an act of love? If I'm trying to manipulate someone into a relationship with me that is just going to use them through altering myself, right? Is that an expression of love? So these are all anti-love as Paul sets them up. And then Paul gives us the fruit of the Spirit. But the fruit of the Spirit is joy, is love, joy, peace, forbearance or patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. Against such things there is no law, right? No one passes a law against such things, right? If you're, this person's way too kind, let's have a lawsuit against them, right? I mean, no one sues someone for kindness, right? And neither is there a Jewish law. Nothing in the Torah, Paul's using Torah here, stops you from being like this. So we have flesh, we have spirit, we have this contrast, and he says, those who belong to Christ Jesus have crucified the flesh with its passions and desires. Since we live by the Spirit, let us walk in step with the Spirit. So Paul's calling us to be spiritual Christians, to live in step with the Spirit. There's so much in this passage, right? We could spend a whole class on this passage going through these. I think maybe someday in the future it'd be fun to just go through these and take stock in our lives. Where are we with each of these, right? What are we doing with? This is what we should be doing with our Christian lives. If we say we're spiritual, this is what we should be doing. And so we could test this in the digital realm. Does the digital realm foster the spiritual fruit that Paul is talking about? Does it give us self-control, or does it give us something else, right? So we can look at the works of the flesh and the fruit of the Spirit and go through them. They're not in any particular order, just the order as it seemed to make sense in a teaching context rather than Paul's order. We can start with self-control. Does it give us self-control? We can see how much time we spend on digital forums, you could say. Moment is a time tracking app that has almost 5 million users and gives us one average. Says the average person spends around 4 hours on their phone every day. This is a few years back, so I would imagine that this is probably increased now. I think this is actually 2014 data. 1/4 of our waking lives, that's a lot of time, of the average person who's using this app, and the people using this app want to know how much time they're spending online. So that is a sort of self-selecting people who are concerned about, okay, how much time am I spending online? Much of that time is devoted to social media, right? Facebook, Snapchat, Instagram, binge watching entertainment. There's an infographic on Netflix addiction here, which I thought was interesting. Gives some, Netflix has made TV shows and film more accessible through online streaming, but has also increased the risk of internet addiction among its users. And it talks about how many people are addicted to binge watching on Netflix. And internet addiction disorder is a documented disorder now, right? We'll talk about that. In this research, I came across a spoof article from the Babylon Bee, which is sort of a Christian satire newspaper that often has articles that crack me up. And this article, report, average Christian strategy to fight sin comprised of binge watching Netflix shows. And it goes through, it's like, yes, it's an ironic, humorous article, but we can say, okay, well, this is where we spend a lot of our time. Is this quality time? Right, Ephesians 5:16, that passage talks about redeeming the time for the days are evil. And I ask, is this quality time? Are we redeeming our time in our digital lives? Studies show links between smartphone use and increased levels of anxiety, depression, poor sleep quality, many other things. Many of us wish we had spent less time online, less time on our phones, less time binge watching things on Netflix. Why are they so hard to ignore? Why is Netflix so hard to ignore? Why are our smartphones so hard to ignore? Well, the reason why is because they're addictive. And there's no other way to put it. I'll talk about why they're addictive. It has to do with something called the dopamine-seeking reward loop, which is very intentionally created. So Facebook, text, all these things that addict us were intentionally created to addict us. And, the point is, smartphone apps, notifications, text notifications, social media were created to give us this little ding, which has to do with social approval. Someone likes you, and you go to that, and then that gives you a shot of dopamine in your brain, which makes you feel good, and then you long for it. So you get that ding, and it's just the cycle, right? A cycle of feeling good. Same thing used by cocaine and slot machines, right? Serious addictions emerge from this, which we'll talk about in a bit. And it's interesting to look at some of the people who created these things, like former vice president of user growth at Facebook, says, I feel tremendous guilt. The short-term dopamine-driven feedback loops that we have created are destroying how society works. He continues, he says, I would never let my own children be involved in that. Expletive deleted. Right? So it's interesting because he has this whole article where he's just apologizing for creating this dopamine feedback loop that's addicted billions of people. And he thinks it's destroying society, destroying relationships. But, he's former vice president. He's no longer concerned with user growth. He's got a conscience. He had a conscience that led him to start speaking out. Others, Sean Parker, there's Sean Parker and the microphone set up as if he's arguing against Mark Zuckerberg, right? Founding president of Facebook says social media literally changes your relationship with society, with each other. It probably interferes with productivity in weird ways. God only knows what it's doing to our children's brains, and he continues, he doesn't let his kids anywhere near social media, right? And then Tim Cook, Apple's chief executive, who doesn't have kids, but he has a nephew, and he says when it comes to his nephew, I won't allow social networks in their lives. So it's interesting to see all these people who've created these apps and social networks don't let their own kids near it because they know what they've created. And that in itself, I find, is sort of convicting bit of information. I think, wow, okay, so where does this leave us? We're in the midst of this, and we can say, okay, well, resisting temptations on social media and entertainment are really hard to resist. There's studies to look at, I think of the marshmallow study that you talked about, Larry, right? So they've done studies on in terms of, people's, how difficult is it to resist social media and the internet versus things like smoking, drinking, or even sleeping, right? There's all kinds of different things that have been tested. And it's, by all categories, harder to resist the lure of the internet, the lure of social media, the lure of your texts than things. If you're trying to stop, it's much more difficult to get off your phone than quit smoking, right? So these are extremely addictive, leads to internet addiction disorder. So there's more and more people who want to stop, right? They say, I can't get away from my phone. I just can't do it. I've tried, right? If you can see, maybe you're addicted. Have you ever tried to get away from your phone? Put it away for a week. See if you can do it, right? What does that feel like? It often leads to a sort of crisis when you do that. Part of this class originally I wanted to do a digital fast. Maybe if you still want to do that, we could suggest it. Sort of getting the feel. Most people told me they really didn't want to do that, so I don't know how many takers I would actually have. But I'm going to try to encourage Andrew to encourage us to do this during Lent when he's back, and see how far we can do. What can we do with this? But our inability to control our use of the internet, right, or digital entertainment or things like that, is this internet addiction disorder. Really tough to beat this. There's resources. There's counselors focused on this. This book, Self-Regulation and Self-Control, talks about this in the midst of other things from a psychologist, Roy Baumeister. So some people are even at the level of having smartphone anxiety to the point where there's phantom limbs. Phones are perceived as phantom limbs. So you don't have your phone, or you think your phone's vibrating in your pocket, but it's not even actually there. And I see some people nodding their heads, right? And this has become more and more common, that it's like, oh, my phone, no, I guess it didn't vibrate. I just imagined that, right? So it's sort of phantom limb symptoms because we're so connected to our phones. There's a very interesting neuroscience behind this because our phones have integrated their ways into our brains in very interesting ways. So that's self-control. And from the studies we've looked at, something that makes you crazily addictive, something that's more addictive than smoking, right, does not seem to foster self-control in our lives. So we can say, okay, well, does digital technology help us with self-control? I'd say the answer is pretty clearly no. It actually takes away certain freedom in that area. What about patience? Does our immersion digital technology make us more patient? So I tried to look for studies on both sides of this. I did not find any studies that say that digital technology helps foster patience. Instead, I found study after study after study saying that digital technology, smartphones, that we're more impatient than ever across the world. It's been tracked by a number of studies in terms of how long are you willing to wait for a meal, for whatever, anything, for paint to dry, for ink to dry, right? And so the numbers have gone down. Like this recent study, respondents reported losing their temper after just 20 seconds of waiting for ink to dry on a greeting card. Additionally, it only takes 22 seconds for people to start cursing their computers or TV if a show doesn't immediately start streaming. So we're down to like about 20 seconds for all these things. That's sort of where a lot of folks are at. Digital technology says the smartphones, on-demand TV is to blame for the ever-growing lack of patience, says one study. The convenience and instant gratification of the internet has increasingly lowered our patience threshold. So I couldn't find one study that said digital technology makes us more patient or helps us with patience. Right? Every study that I found says the opposite. So we can say, okay, well, that's not a spiritual fruit we're getting out of digital technology. What about joy and peace? Stress, relaxation. Does it help us with that? Lots of studies on this as well. Same story. Thanks to mobile phones and everything they allow us to do, it means we are that often when we are relaxing, we are still switched on. Research on happiness has found that people are happier when they're engrossed in meaningful work than when they are filling time with entertainment. So, number of studies, modern stress. 6 in 10 millennials never relax because of the constant urge to check their phone. This study, our smartphones aren't sparking joy, and we need to rethink our addiction to them. There's a lot of interesting studies, a lot of interesting reflections on this question of peace, joy, relaxation, how we're obsessive with checking our phones. And I couldn't find anything, right? Found articles on technology stealing the joy of the national parks because people are out there with their music and people are out there with all this stuff, so you don't get the silence and people are complaining. And so there's all if you try to look for joy, peace, relaxation, all these things, again, the message looks pretty negative. What about kindness and gentleness as fruits of the Spirit versus works of the flesh, such as anger and strife? Again, trying to say, has our digital technology made anyone kinder and more gentle, according to any major study? Same story. I find stuff like this. Scientific American, why is everyone on the internet so angry? A perfect storm engenders online rudeness, including virtual anonymity and thus a lack of accountability, physical distance, and the medium of writing. Is social media making us ruder from psychology today? And the answer is yes. Internet is making us angry, thoughtless, and less truthful, right? So a number of studies, Scientific American is reviewing a number of studies and says the things that work together in social media and digital technology, like anonymity, it's much easier to be angry and rude to someone if they don't know who you are and you really don't know who they are. And even if it's just sort of a Facebook friend or a friend from high school that you never really see anymore, there's this barrier of distance, and the distance fosters rudeness. Easier to be nasty in writing than speech. You don't have the direct response of people, right? When you see their face, when you see their expression, when you hurt them in real life, it has more of an emotional toil when we look people in the eye. So one study says that social media makes us ruder because of lack of eye contact, and that's a major feature. Any place there's lack of eye contact, you're going to be ruder, right? You're not gonna have that physiological response to hurting someone that you would in a normal social interaction. So we say, okay, these are things we all need to be on guard against. Here's a couple more studies. Green with Facebook envy, red with Twitter rage. Right, we can say, what about things like anger, strife, envy? We're getting an envy here. The more you vent through social media, the more likely you are to utilize negative expression styles in other areas of your life, and vice versa. Our digital and real life selves can feed off each other. If you tend to compare yourself with others, you might consider limiting your time spent on social network. The advice is, if you have any tendency towards comparing yourself or thinking about your status or being at all envious, then get off social networks, because it's not going to help you in that category of your life. If you're a person that's 100% satisfied with your life and happy and contented, then you're okay, right? So it's interesting the sort of advice that these studies give. It's saying, okay, if you're kind of a spiritually mature person, then you're probably not going to be inclined towards this in terms of you're not tempted by envy or jealousy. But if you are, don't go on social media. Right? Journal for Preventive Medicine, social media sites like Twitter, Snapchat, Tumblr, and Facebook elicit feelings of envy and the distorted belief that others lead happier and more successful lives. Facilitate feelings of being excluded. And some studies say social media makes us antisocial. Right? So, and looks at sort of, what is the core of being antisocial and how this fosters. So, antisocial disorder is pretty much the opposite of spiritual fruit, right? And so we can think about these things. We say, okay, this is all to kind of take stock, to take a step back and to ask, what do we want out of life? What do we want? Do we want to foster spiritual fruit in our lives? Or the works of the flesh, and how is digital technology helping us or hindering us from doing this? So here's a little video that summarizes some of this.
A recent global study conducted by Kaspersky Lab reveals that social media users are interacting less face-to-face due to the ability to stay in touch online. In the study, researchers found that about 1/3 of people communicate less with their parents, children, and friends, and about 1/4 communicate less with their partners because they can simply follow them on social media. The study was conducted between October and November of last year among 16,750 participants, split evenly between men and women at least 16 years old from 18 countries. Participants were surveyed on the types of items they post on social media and the types of posts from others that have positive or negative influences on their moods. They were also asked about things they might do if it meant obtaining more likes from their followers, including such things as posting salacious photos of friends or coworkers, or revealing sensitive information about someone else. Many participants made it clear that social media made them jealous of others. Nearly 60% of the participants viewed a friend as having a better life than their own, simply by seeing that friend's social media activity, and almost half were upset after viewing photos from a friend's happy holiday celebration. Half of the participants reported using the outlets as a means to post optimistic things, and 61% said they go on to post things that make them smile. Researchers ultimately found that many people will go to harmful lengths simply to win likes from followers.
So you can think of this data and the dopamine drive, right? Posting salacious photos, seductive photos, inappropriate photos of a friend, or being envious of a friend's holiday, these are friends, right? Friends' holiday pictures, and the harmful lengths people will go to just for likes, right? Just for likes. Because this is the world that the people surveyed are living in, right? This is what fuel us. These likes fuel so many people. And you can ask for yourself, well, how much does this fuel me? How much am I involved in these networks? How much, what does my digital life look like? And we'll all be different in these categories. The other part of the fruits of the Spirit and the works of the flesh have to do with love, right, and goodness versus things like sensuality, impurity, sexual immorality, right? And so this word porneia. So we say, okay, well, what has the internet done for this category of the works of the flesh? And I think this is something that I think everyone here probably has an obvious answer to that. Well, it hasn't helped. It hasn't helped lessen the availability of pornographic content, right? Or videos that are the ability to put naked videos of a random person online without any accountability whatsoever, right? And so there's this whole category of revenge porn, right? You're angry at someone, you follow them to the restroom, you take a picture of them, you put them online, everyone sees it, okay. And there's no accountability for this, right? You could try to sue. This is very hard to follow up on because it's anonymous. You don't know who ultimately took it, right? And so pornography has become mainstream. Also popularizes streaming media. I have some studies here. This study here on online sexual activity, examination of potential problematic behaviors, says increased consumption of pornography results from greater access and how it has become normalized in modern society. In 2014, this is 2014 data. The data has only gone up in the last few years. 79% of males and 76% of females under 30 watched online pornography at least once a month, and 58% of college students say they consume online pornography at least once a week. This is of men and women. What's interesting is what online pornography has done is it's increased the numbers for women at a rate that is truly disturbing, right? If you look at data on who consumes most pornography on their phones, it's women, right? And so there's this jump, and there's also a market. So HBO and Netflix have realized there's a market in selling and getting porn to women. So you see, HBO wants to normalize porn, right? And there's a couple articles I've cited here that are pushing back on this, looking at the data, saying if you're watching these mainstream shows like Game of Thrones, you're watching porn, right? HBO is selling violent porn and calling it subscription television. What you need to know about the new show Euphoria, right? So these shows, like Euphoria has just debuted, and you can see from these articles that we're talking about pretty explicit stuff here, stuff that in the past was only available through extremely narrow channels. Like you have to go someplace very particular to get this sort of entertainment. I don't even want to call it entertainment. It's pornography, right? But now it's everywhere. It's everywhere, and anyone who has a Netflix account can go on and watch the most explicit categories of porn that used to be available to a very select few. And so what we find now is both men and women at unprecedented numbers are addicted to this stuff because it's mainstream. You watch it, people watch a show that's popular. Euphoria, which has just debuted, is marketed towards teenagers. Right? This is marketed towards teens. They're saying it's the next 13 Reasons Why. And I know youth in this church who've watched 13 Reasons Why. They say it's jumping into that market. So I'm thinking, okay, so is this the next? This is the next wave. This is what we should expect, the sort of mainstream of porn. So I'm glad there's some youth parents in here to hear this, because we have to watch our kids with this stuff. One author says, why is it that when we dress these scenes up with HBO glitz and glamour, that all of a sudden they are socially acceptable? It is because we actually love porn, but we don't want to admit that publicly. We don't want to surf the dirty websites, but if we can get our porn via HBO, all on Netflix and or Amazon Prime now, by the way, it's like having our cake and eating it too. Porn without the social stigma. Porn that your spouse actually lets you watch. Porn you can rationalize. And this author continues, is a Christian talking about this, and he says, when you connect with someone pornographically online, this is a relationship, right? This is a relationship when you connect with someone in that way. But it's not a relationship you're supposed to have. So we can talk about why it's wrong, right? This is the word sexual immorality. This is where we get the word porn. And so we can say, okay, well, this might seem to be a pretty dire scenario, right? Lots of negativity. So let's switch to how can we cultivate the fruits of the Spirit in the digital world? I think one of the first things we could do is try to get downtime, right? If you're waiting for a bus, if you're on the treadmill, if you're, whatever you're doing, if you're taking a walk, leave your phone at home, right? Downtime is so important. Here's a study on downtime. And again, these are in negative terms, like the study says, digital devices deprive brain of needed downtime. But okay, so what's the solution? Leave your digital device at home. Downtime lets the brain go over experiences it had, solidify them, turn them into permanent long-term memories. When the brain is constantly stimulated, you prevent this learning process. University of Michigan study says, people learn significantly better after a walk in nature than after a walk in an urban environment, because processing a barrage of information leaves people fatigued. So if you want to restore joy and peace to your life, schedule some downtime away from your phone, away from computers, take a walk with your family. Nature is particularly powerful. We're going to talk about nature in a moment. Here's an interesting book that gives some practical advice how to get your brain less distracted. It says The Distracted Mind, Ancient Brains in a High-Tech World. These folks are saying from a neurophysiological perspective, our brains are not meant for all this information to come in. So we need to relax. We're stressing ourselves out. The amount of cortisol in our brains, which causes stress and brain damage actually, is unprecedented. So we need to relax with this stuff. Mark Berman, University of Michigan neuroscientist, says even though people feel entertained when relaxed, when they multitask while exercising or passing a moment at the bus stop, catching a quick video clip, they are taxing their brains. People think they're refreshing themselves, but they're fatiguing themselves. For true peace of mind, we need to first disconnect from the digital distractions. So that's the first step. Find a time to disconnect. It doesn't have to be all the time, right? You're not going to quit smoking in a day, but just think about that cigarette. Okay, do I really need it? Maybe I'm just going to take a walk rather than a smoke, right? If you think about your phone like a cigarette, you want to have some downtime. Think of it that way. Disconnecting helps us to reconnect, right? There's an ad, such and such is just a phone call away. I was thinking, well, spiritual fruit is just a phone put away, right, in this day and age. So numerous studies have shown that people engage in deeper, more meaningful conversations in the absence of mobile devices. The empathy that naturally arises when talking with a friend gets short-circuited, even by the mere presence of a phone. But when we put our phones away, and this has been documented in numerous studies, just putting a phone away so it's not visible actually increases the quality of your personal interactions. Right? You have more empathy. You have more compassion. You're kinder. These are just putting the phone away helps you with fruits of the Spirit. Restoring our souls. The majority of participants in the 2019 study experienced negative emotions upon disconnecting from the internet when they tried to go on vacation without their phones. And so here's a study, separation anxiety, digital free travel elicits emotional roller coaster, and then liberation. So it's interesting, they did a number of studies on people going on vacation without any digital devices. And the first thing they experienced was withdrawal symptoms from the dopamine cycle, right? The reward loop. I need my fix. But then after a week of that, they felt liberated. Right? So it's interesting to see what happens when you study people who put their phones away After initial frustrations, travelers engaged much more with their surroundings, interacted more often with traveling companions and locals. Other studies showed not just enjoyment and liberation and appreciation, but this idea of compassion, empathy. They were more considerate of people they're standing in line with, right? And so there's all these things. It's just amazing what our phones do to us and what happens. We're not beyond help. We're not beyond help, and that's the good news. This is another interesting book, Last Child in the Woods. These are from scientists who've documented what's called nature deficit disorder, which is another new disorder, that children today are growing up with so few experiences of nature. The amount of children that don't have a tree in sight in the house they grow up in, right, is quite, most children grow up in urban environments, and many of those have no view of nature from where they are, and this actually causes certain deficits that have been documented. That have to do with all kinds of things, like atrophying of senses, learning, but, right, he says, atrophying of senses was occurring long before we came to be bombarded with the latest digital generation of computers, high-definition TV, and wireless phones. Urban children and many suburban children have long been isolated from the natural world, but the new technology accelerates the phenomenon. As we grow more separate from nature, we continue to separate from one another. So this is a book that documents what happens when we're away from nature and how digital technology removes us from nature. And he's saying the solution, get back into nature. Don't just stare at a tree for 5 minutes a day, and it'll help you in remarkable ways. And so this is part of the solution. How do we get back? I think of Psalm 23. Right, he leadeth me beside still water, or green pastures, and still waters. He restores my soul. There's something about green pastures and still waters that restore our soul, and that's part of this larger picture of who we are. Right? Imagine a therapy that had no known side effects, was readily available, and could improve your cognitive functioning at zero cost. Such a therapy has been known to philosophers, writers, and lay people alike. Interacting with nature. That's this study, this research report, the cognitive benefits of interacting with nature. It's a review study, looks at all these different studies, and says it's for free. People have known this for a long time. All you need to do is do it, right? Go into nature, take a walk in Tilden. There's so many benefits. There's mounting empirical evidence that interacting with nature delivers a range of measurable benefits, including positive effects on physical health, psychological well-being, cognitive ability, and social cohesion. It makes you more social as opposed to antisocial. It helps you connect with others. It makes you more empathic, compassionate. Just walking in the park restores you in significant ways. Another study from Landscape and Planning, the benefits of nature experience improve affect and cognition. Compared to the urban walk, nature walk resulted in effective benefits. Decreased anxiety, rumination, that's thoughtfulness, and negative affect, right? Decreased anxiety, rumination, negative affect, and preservation of positive affect. Right, so decreased negative affect and increased positive affect. So you're more social is the essence of this, as well as cognitive benefits, right? Better memory, better focus, and so on. There's a cognitive scientist by the name of Justin Barrett, and he's actually a Christian. He's originally from California, was at Oxford University for a while, came back to Southern California, is now a researcher there. He wrote a book on Why Would Anyone Believe in God, which has to do with our cognition and sort of the mental aspects of how we think and things like that. And in that, he talks about why people lose belief, why people gain belief. A lot of it is research on children. And so at the end, he gives some advice. He says, well, if you want to raise your children in different ways, this is how you do it. And in one book, it's called Born Believers, he gives some advice on if you want to raise your child as a theist, this is how you do it. In this book, he gives some advice on how, if you want to raise your child as an atheist, as someone who doesn't believe in God, this is how you do it. And I find this interesting for our discussion. He says, an excellent strategy for nurturing atheism and fighting theism, and this is from someone who does believe in God as a scientist, right, is to submerge oneself in a context in which the agency all around is obviously human. In other places, he said, this is In the world of technology in an urban environment, this is what you do. If you don't want your kids to believe in God, put them in an urban environment with lots of technology. Little or no room is left to detect ambiguous agency that might be labeled godly. Living in a fully urban setting is a good step in the right direction for nurturing atheism. Life surrounded by wilderness or natural systems would be a mistake for one who wants to strengthen atheism. Right? And then theistic advice, right? You reverse it. He says in the other book, if you want to raise your kids to believe in God, have them experience nature. Get them away from technology. The agency, right? There's something about nature that opens the door to thinking about agency that's transcendent from human agency. And it does something in our minds that opens this door. So this is his advice as a cognitive scientist. And we can take this advice ourselves, right? We're all still developing. None of us is immune to any of this. So we can think about this. We can think about fruit, right? Spiritual fruit. Do you have it? Do you want it? What does it look like in your life when you go into the digital world, right? Has your internet uses affected the works of the flesh in your life? If so, how? Has your internet uses affected the fruits of the Spirit growing in your life? If so, how? And what steps can we take to disconnect and reconnect?